The crowd got quiet very, very quickly. You guys have nothing to talk about today. Maybe it's the rain. But, okay, thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure to welcome all of you. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for our Modern Minds program here at Beth Jacob. And the Modern Minds series we've been running for a number of years really brings thought leaders and experts from around the world, and also from here locally, to engage and explore significant, important, interesting, challenging issues facing our community. I want to express appreciation, deep appreciation once again, to the sponsors of the series for a number of years now, to Heidi and Albert Pro and Anna and Dirk Penela. Thank you so much. So, thank you so much for coming out in this bad weather, because you understand how important this conversation is. I want to keep my introductory words very, very brief and hand it over to this distinguished panel of experts, but I do want to just say a short word, 2 lines of introduction, that we read in these weeks about the Mishkan, and the centerpiece of the Mishkan is the Aron. And in the Aron is housed the Luchot, and which means that the Aron, the Ark, represents the substance of tradition, of the beautiful Jewish tradition that we have. And Jewish education is so important to all of us, and it's so essential to all of us, because really that's the way we transmit that tradition, which is represented, symbolized by the Aron, the way we transmit that tradition to the next generation. But what's interesting is that the Aron is fashioned, it's plated with gold on the inside and on the outside, but the core and the main element that's used for the Aron is wood. If it's so important and so precious that it's housing the Luchot and represents the substance of tradition, why not make it entirely of gold? And one of the explanations is that Chas HaTorah al-Mamonin Shel Yisrael, that the Torah, it takes into consideration the financial well-being of the Jewish people. And if it was entirely of gold, and it was such a big ark, and it was entirely of gold, that would be too overwhelming and such a big burden on the Jewish people. And therefore it's just plated on the inside and on the outside with gold, but the middle is wood, to be less expensive for the Jewish people. And to me, this image of the Aron encapsulated really the challenge of the conversation this evening, which is, and we're going to be talking about, and you'll be hearing from this panel, about the value of a Jewish education, the strength of our area yeshivot, and we're blessed to have strong yeshivot with strong leaders, but to have an honest, frank, candid conversation about our school system in general. And of course, the main topic is the affordability. Chas Torah al-Mamonin Shel Yisrael. The Torah takes into account the financial well-being of the Jewish people, and so the value quotient, but also the affordability of Jewish education. So, thank you so much. Tonight is really an outstanding opportunity for us to hear from a distinguished panel of experts that we put together. I want to thank Abigail Schreier, who's going to be moderating and a significant part of the conversation as a moderator. And Abigail is not only a member of Beth Jacob, but she's a graduate of Yale Law School. She's someone who's a writer, whose articles appear in the Wall Street Journal, the Federalist, National Review, the Jewish Journal, among others, including an article today, an excellent article that appeared in today's Wall Street Journal about anti-Semitism and the BDS movement, that I encourage everyone to take a look at that article. So I'm going to hand it over to Abigail. I want to thank all the panelists tonight. Each of them is a leading educator who has a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience in the area of Jewish education. Thank you so much to each of you, to Rabbi Spodek, Dr. Parks, Dr. Graf, Dr. Goldberg, together with Abigail Schreier, on giving up your time and your experience to share with our community, and hopefully we could have this conversation, frank, honest conversation, become more educated, and who knows, maybe move the needle towards a stronger, brighter Jewish education and brighter Jewish future. Thank you so much. Hand it over to Abigail Schreier.
Thank you for having an additional child. And there is widespread concern that largely because of the so-called tuition crisis, the modern Orthodox model is unsustainable. While we will always sacrifice to ensure Jewish education for our children, there is serious doubt that future generations will be able to do the same, given the cost trajectory. The good news is that there are no villains in this story. The problems of high day school tuition is the product of a perfect storm of good intentions. Each of the day schools has a board filled with very good people who give generously over and above the tuitions they pay. The boards have two roles to play in this story. They provide for the members of the community who cannot afford tuition, and they donate new items to the school that often have the effect of incremental raises in the tuition everyone pays. New technologies, new buildings, auxiliary staff, administrators, single purview counselors, and spanking new curricula. Many of those who get tuition breaks could pay full tuition if it were at a more manageable level. Because it isn't, they must submit to the embarrassing process of opening their private financial lives to review by their peers. There is no mechanism at almost any of these schools for lowering costs, and so they never drop. The problem of high tuition is a problem of costs, not of revenue. And nobody with decision-making authority at the schools has any vested interest in lowering costs. One might reason, as the schools often do, okay, costs are going up, but at least the quality of education is improving. But there is, generally speaking, no proof that that is the case. There are no test results or empirical indicia that schools are almost ever willing to provide that education is measurably improving in step with rising costs. One of the singular accomplishments of the Jewish people on the world stage throughout history is our stunning ability to educate our children. But in recent decades, we have lost confidence. Our schools fall for nearly every educational fad. New technologies, faddish curricula, trendy educational methods, and specialized counselors, often with little to no statistical evidence that these produce measurable improvement in the formidable task of readying our children for their futures. Often the technologies and software are too new to come back with any empirical proof of their success at all. Unsurprisingly, a few short years after their adoption, trendy curricula are often replaced. New technologies quickly outmoded. I'm not a teacher of writing, but I am a writer. And I can tell you that if you would like your child to become a good writer, the first thing you should do is take the outlining app on your child's iPad and any special writing app designed to boost creativity in writing, and delete them. Better yet, throw the whole iPad in the garbage. The problem with many technological innovations to the classroom is not only that they are so often useless in improving our children's minds and knowledge base, but often that they are costly too. Every donation of smart boards requires upkeep, replacement, teacher training, tech specialists, technology fees added to tuition, and often untold hours lost to distraction when our children might actually have managed to learn something. This is only my take. I welcome others and look forward to hearing from this esteemed panel. But I leave you with this: the urge to simplify the schools. Strip down the auxiliary faculty. They are hired at the expense of Jewish children. Return to the basics in education, as we very often still do with Torah studies, and get some control over costs that are spiraling, creating fancier, more Instagrammable classrooms and glittery campuses, without any empirical indicia that this vast outlay of resources is strengthening our children's minds, bringing them closer to Torah, helping to raise up our community, or readying our children to make a Kiddush Hashem in the broad world. We have a wonderful panel of experts here tonight. Rabbi Joshua Spodek is the head of the Yula Girls School. He earned his bachelor's in Talmud studies from Yeshivat Shalavim and his rabbinic ordination from the Shal Institute of Rabbinic and Educational Leadership. Between 2004 and 2006, Rabbi Spodek earned a master's in school supervision and administration from Loyola University of Chicago Graduate School. Dr. Deborah Parks is the principal of the Harkham Gowan School. She owns a BA and MA in early education, an MA in gifted and talented education, and a PhD in curriculum and instruction, all from the University of Alabama. Dr. Gil Graff has served as an executive director of the Board of Jewish Education since 1993. He holds a master's in education as well as a JD and PhD in Jewish history from UCLA. He is a longtime educator and the author of 2 books and numerous articles on issues of Jewish education, history, and law. Dr. Scott Goldberg is an associate professor of education and psychology at Yeshiva University. He is a teacher, consultant, and researcher in a variety of areas, including school governance and finance. He holds a BA from the University of Chicago, a master's from Bank Street's College of Education, and a PhD from New York University. I'm going to give each of the members of the panel a chance to say a few words, but first I want to tell everyone one last thing I promised to do, and that is to let everyone know about the wonderful tuition assistance available from the Jewish Free Loan Association at no interest. So please check it out, and they ask that people get in touch with them. Okay, so now I'd like to, starting with Dr. Goldberg, I'd like to begin by letting each of the panelists who are experts here help us frame and teach us a little about what they think about the so-called problem of tuition and what they think the solution might be.
Well, thank you first to the Jacob Congregation for convening the conversation with Tom and Posey, and for my esteemed panelists for allowing me to sit with you. It's really a wonderful opportunity. Thank you for all coming out. Just want to add one piece to my bio, which is perhaps the most important piece. I'm the father of 4 children, day school graduates as well as day school students. I also get a tuition bill, and I pay it, and so I do understand the costs of education. I understand the cost as a consumer. I understand the product as a consumer. I also understand the costs and the product as a professional from the inside. I do want to just note a few things. One is the title of the program tonight is The High Cost of Jewish Education. It's very easy for an introduction to kind of gloss over what the high cost of not having a Jewish education is. And we know what the high cost of not having a Jewish education is. It's not only assimilation and intermarriage, but it also has other effects because we actually do have data on outcomes. And there are published articles with the data. And it doesn't take more than going to a library to look at it or having conversations tonight to suggest that there is a rich history of Jewish educational success when it comes to both day schools at the elementary level as well as the high schools, not only in terms of next generation leadership in communities, and that could be affiliation with synagogues and leadership in synagogues, affiliation in terms of sending children to a Jewish institution, having Jewish children, having Jewish grandchildren. The list goes on and on. In addition to outcomes in terms of academics at the college level and also even at the high school level, we do have statistics. We do have quantitative and qualitative information and results of what it means to have a Jewish education. And it's really important to understand that we also have the outcomes in terms of what it costs not to. We can speak more about the panel perhaps as that even goes on about some of the more specifics and what is being done in terms of the investment by institutions to ensure that that quality remains. But I do want to mention that. The last thing I just want to mention is that I do think that it's also easy in an introduction to kind of gloss over the issues of that there are other things that have risen in cost and there are other things that cost a lot of money, housing and cost of cars and the like. But the reality is I think that we ultimately have not a tuition crisis, but we have a values crisis. A values crisis in terms of what it is that we value, what it is that we spend our money on, in terms of the continuum of the Jewish community, both to have and mostly those who have. Certainly those that do not have the means to pay. Every single child should get a Jewish education. Every single child deserves it. The community has a responsibility all the way back to the days of the Talmud, Yoshua ben Galma, guaranteeing everybody and really charging everybody in every community to have a yeshiva that can provide the quality of education that we know our schools are working towards today.
Just so we all understand, when you say the values crisis, what is the values crisis?
The values crisis is that years ago, when we talk about the cost of Jewish education, perhaps even tuition doubling, cost of Jewish education doubling in the last 20 years generation, as others here have even spoken about before the panel sat, no one, I think, dreamed of spending $1,000 on a phone in your pocket 10 years ago as we do now, many people without question. No one thought about the idea of paying $4, $5, $6 for a cup of coffee every day 10 years ago or 15 years ago, before Starbucks made it so that it was the normal practice to do for many, not all, for many. But there are actions that we take that wind up making it so that the cost of living has increased in such a way that we look at the cost of Jewish education in a way that there is a value that we have put on it, and perhaps we don't value it, perhaps we don't see the quality outcomes, perhaps we don't see it, and there are ways that we can work together to be able to improve it. But the question really is, do we value it in such a way that we want to guarantee it for everyone in the Jewish community? And do we value it enough that we want our children to go into it? If we want to reduce tuition, 80% of a budget is the cost of your faculty and staff. You're going to do it on the backs of the teachers who are already struggling to get the best and brightest to go into the classrooms on the Jewish studies side and the general studies side. We will do it on the backs of them and then wonder what the next generation of educators will look like. It will not be the best and brightest for sure. It will not be those who should be in the classroom because they have not only the passion but also the ability to be able to do it.
Okay, so then costs could not go down. Is that what you're saying?
I think that there are ways to bring down 20% of the cost. And I think there are ways to rise to 80% because teachers are currently mostly across the country underpaid, and we should not do anything on the backs of those educators who are already underpaid.
I think we're actually going to jump to Rabbi Skoda for a second, because I think you had something similar to say.
Almost the exact same.
Okay.
In my notes, I had written that I don't believe we're framing the question correctly. I also don't believe we have a tuition crisis. We do have a values crisis. With all the empirical data that Dr. Goldberg suggested, there is also a concept in Judaism of pukchazi, of go out and see.
Excuse me 1 second. With all the empirical data, he said we do have empirical data. He did not cite any empirical data.
Okay.
Just want to like.
And I'm not certainly going to cite the empirical data. I'll leave that for the PhDs on the panel. Okay. But I would suggest that if you look at the leadership within almost every Jewish community throughout the country, they are day school graduates. The leaders of the non-for-profits that are running the High Lifelines and the ETAs and the Yachads and all of the Israel non-for-profits, they are day school graduates. I think the question that Dr. Goldberg asked is the important question. What would our world look like today without Jewish education? And the proof, I think, is in our population, is in our leadership, is in the rabbis of our community, the scholars in our community, the COOs and CFOs and leaders of all of the non-for-profits within the Jewish community that run our Jewish communities, by and large, are day school graduates. And so the question becomes a values question and not necessarily a tuition question. At the same time, if I could, I do want to suggest a few potential short-term things that we could be looking at that may reduce minimally the cost of tuition, and then maybe suggest a long-term solution that may have a greater impact on us. I think first and foremost, on a short-term level, schools need to run more like businesses, which is a hard statement to make because we often feel that schools need to be a place of compassion and love, and it's a Jewish school and it's a Jewish community. But schools get into a lot of trouble when they're not run effectively like a business. We are running millions and millions of dollars in a budget, and we are entrusting those millions of dollars to often educators who don't have business backgrounds, heads of schools, myself included, who doesn't have a business background, asking us to make difficult decisions about medical insurance and workman's comp and all of the other business sides of a school. And I would suggest that if every school invested in a CFO, an accountant, somebody who was trained in finances and business and took a hard look at all of the costs in our school, we may be able to lower the cost of tuition somewhat. I don't have specifics on that point, but I believe that with schools looking at themselves more like a business, we may make an impact in that sense. Second, and I know this is not going to be popular, but I do believe schools are giving out far too much in financial aid. And I suggest that because, again, the financial aid process in most schools is led by members within our own community who are subjective and who have caring hearts and want to give and not turn away any Jewish child. But when we are giving out thousands of dollars in financial aid, and that same family pulls up the next day to my school in a Tesla, or in a Mercedes SUV, or I know that they've made a trip with their family to Israel, or they've sent their kids to dates at summer camps, I wonder if we are giving out far too much in financial aid, and we are being generous on the backs of the rising cost of tuition. And if we could somehow find a way to be more objective in our financial aid, and give to those that truly need, and not to those that just want, I think we may find a way to reduce the cost. Another short-term suggestion is to potentially pool resources as schools. Health benefits may come down if the local area schools pull together their employees and have one local plan as opposed to each school having their own medical plan. And there may be other ways as well if we pooled our resources and had some sort of, I'm not going to suggest a union per se, but a way for our schools to work together in that sense. We may find savings in those ways. So those are three short-term potential. I want to be clear, I think those are minimal savings. I think the only long-term solution to this crisis, if we can call it a crisis, are endowments. There's only one community that I know of that has been successful in doing so. It's the community that I grew up in, Chat, the Community Hebrew Academy of Toronto, just recently lowered their tuition by $10,000 for 5 years, based on 2 gifts of over $15 million to the community, recognizing that they needed to lower the cost of tuition substantially. And if that's the kind of tuition decrease that we want to see, our community needs to think long-term about endowment giving so that we can, in 10 years, potentially lower the cost substantially by 10 to 15,000, as opposed to the 2 or 3, which some of my earlier suggestions might help us with.
Thank you so much. And actually would love to hear from Dr. Parks on what she thinks, because she has a different cost structure at her school.
Okay, thank you. The whole tuition thing is very complicated because a couple of people now mentioned already that the highest line item on schools' budgets are the salaries of teachers, and there's no way of getting around that unless, of course, you don't have as much staff. But the people who teach at the schools live in LA, and it's a very high cost of living here. So it's very complicated just to say, don't have as many teachers or cut their salaries. Some of that you just can't do. At Arkham Academy, we're a high school that this is our 4th year in existence, and we have found ways around that and around the whole tuition. Our tuition is $15,000, which is pretty inexpensive. That's full pay. And then there's a charge for the curriculum. When we first started, our general studies classes are done online, and then the rabbis teach the Judaic classes in person. And then we have instructors from Santa Monica College who come and teach the Hebrew language. So we get college credit at no charge for the Hebrew language and for other classes as well while they're in high school. So we have the first 3 years that we were in existence, we jumped on to LA Unified's online curriculum, which wasn't ideal, but that gave us a stronger footing to continue our school because we didn't have to pay for the online curriculum, and that was a huge savings for us. But now we have our own curriculum that we are purchasing, and we're not part of LAUSD anymore. It raised the cost a little of going to our school, but it's a much stronger curriculum. So the kids do their classes online at school with teachers there to help them. So there's one math teacher. We don't have an algebra teacher, a geometry teacher. We have one math teacher who has a master's in secondary math education, so she can cover all of those classes. So the kids go at math time, they're in the math room with the math teacher. They work independently, but she's there to answer any questions or re-explain anything. So that's a way that we're able to keep our costs down. I just wanted to drink real quick. Sorry. Also, we don't have textbooks because the curriculum is online. There are some Judaic textbooks that we have and use, but that's minimal. So we don't have a lot of stuff around. We don't have a lot of papers and books, and we have paperback books for a literature class, but so that's another cost saving for us. Our teachers are full-time, but they actually teach half-time, and they're there for the rest of the day to help anybody who needs help all during the day. So if somebody has free time or a free period, there's always somebody there to help them. And we can keep this model. We would break even at about 75 students, and we wouldn't have to have any donations if we had 75 full-pay kids. We have about 45 right now, so we still rely on donations from the outside and from our board. But it is sustainable, and it's affordable, and it's working. Our kids are going to college. They're getting almost 2 years of college done while they're in high school. They graduate after 11th grade. They don't have to go for 12th grade if they don't want to, if they work a little faster and finish ahead of time, which is another cost savings. And that time and money that parents would have spent on the first year or two of college, it's already taken care of, because the kids don't have to pay for community college classes while they're in high school. So they get college credit and high school credit at the same time. So it's a time and money saver now and in the future.
Amazing. And then the last thing I'm going to ask Dr. Graff, and I'm going to ask him something, because I think he also said it was a values. Did you also say to me that it was a values crisis, or was that not? No. Well, you can tell me what you think, but if you would address in your remarks, help us frame what the, is there a cost crisis? Maybe there is none. Maybe the tuition is exactly as low as it could be. I want to clarify two things. One, it's very hard to say that it's a values crisis when people are paying as much as they're paying to educate their children in Jewish day school. It's really hard to look at families who are outlaying that much after tax money and saying, you don't value Jewish education enough. I think we're all here tonight just to talk about whether we can lower costs. Since the schools are not all charging the same, there must be some wiggle room, and hopefully we can address it. I think everyone's here because they do value yeshiva education. Please, Dr. Graff, take it away.
Well, thank you very much for the second introduction, which allows me to start, as Dr. Goldberg did, with personal experience. I am the parent of 3 children. They attended day school, kindergarten through 12th grade, and I paid 100 cents on the dollar. That was between 1986 and 2006. And A, I will tell you how I did it. B, I will tell you it would not be possible to do today, and why I think that is the case. And C, point to some directions to consider as we move forward. 1986 to 2006. How did I do it? I was working at BJE. My wife worked half-time, also in the field of education. 1.5 salaries in the field of education could not pay those tuitions. So I taught a college course once a week at night. I taught Sunday school. I had 3 weeks vacation. I transformed those 15 off days into salary by teaching elder hostel programs, so I would get paid by the use of my vacation time. For the high holidays, I left town and I officiated at services in the Midwest. And when we added up those dollars, not taking vacations because my vacation time was used otherwise, we reserved funds so that each child could have, as a teenager, one immersive Jewish experience during the summer months. At one time in life, I was a camp director. My children did not go to Jewish summer camp because I was paying day school tuition. But that was possible to do 20 years ago. Since that time, day school tuitions have skyrocketed to a level where my wife could have worked full-time plus, and I could have continued working full-time plus. We could not pay for tuition. You have 3 children today and 2 are in high school, that's $80,000 after taxes, and 1 is in elementary school, that's $25,000, that's $105,000. And with the cost of housing and tax responsibility, is simply inconceivable. What has happened, I believe, is driven by people, all of whom want the very best for their children, who have the means to create magnificent facilities, to equip those facilities, to seek out fine instructors, and I'm happy to say, Rabbis Goldberg and Spodek, that teacher salaries have increased as part of this in Los Angeles. And its teachers are better paid today than they were 20 years ago, and we should take pride in that. We have attracted wonderful educators who have relocated here and who teach the children who are in those schools. It may be possible for 20 to 25% of the seats in those schools to be filled by people who can pay those after-tax dollars and not be strapped as a result. That is to say, the same person who contributed $1 million to the building campaign and who contributed to bring some wonderful educators from out of town and has 4 children can pay the $130,000 tuition for the 4 children and not feel burdened or overtaxed. And then there may be another 15% of the people who, doing above and beyond and making a value decision that they are not going to come in that expensive vehicle, but they're going to be driving their 2005 Ford to the school because they're investing in the child's education, can pay the full tuition. But well over 50% of the children in Jewish day schools in Los Angeles today are on some amount of need-based aid. More than 50% are not paying the list price, and quite honestly, in the Orthodox day schools, it tends to be a little higher. We have in our community 24 Orthodox day schools and 14 other than Orthodox day schools. I will share with you some other data, because Abigail likes empirical evidence. We have if I ask you how many children are in Jewish high schools, grades 9 through 12 in this community, how many children do you think are in high schools? Well, in the Orthodox sector, let's put aside there are 2 community day high schools, Milken Community School and the Di Toledo School. If you table those 2 schools and their 2 students, in Orthodox day high schools, grades 9 through 12, and I'm of course including Arkham Gaon Academy, there are 1,700 students. There are 14 schools for the 1,700 students. And the reason there are 14 schools for 1,700 students, the most recent one is a school that opened with 6 9th grade girls this September, is because there the kippah is black and here we like it to have some color. And those people over there spend only 3 hours in Gemara, and our sons should spend 4 hours in Gemara. So you have these niche schools. Of course, every school needs a head of school, and every school needs a principal, and every school needs a dean. And I will tell you the following bit of data. There is an organization in California called the California Association of Private School Organizations, CAPSO. I am the treasurer of CAPSO. The president is Catholic. They made the Jew the treasurer. CAPSO is organizations, networks of private schools. So the Episcopalian schools, the Catholic schools, the Jewish schools, the Seventh-day Adventist schools, CAIS, the California Association of Independent Schools, which is largely non-sectarian, though it has some religious schools among its membership. And there is a network of special needs schools. There are 21 organizations that collectively represent 400,000 of the 500,000 children in the state of California who are in private schools. If you look at the 21 networks, CAPSO examined the density of administrators per pupils. As you know, in special needs education, you have just a few children per teacher and administrator. If you set aside the special needs network, the greatest density of administrators per student population population is the Jewish school system, okay? And it stands to reason that if you have a school of 60 and a school of 23 and a school of 40, and you know that that's going to be the reality. Now, it is a free enterprise zone here, the United States of America, and nobody can tell the next person that their notion of what will be the ideal school cannot be initiated if she or he brings money to the table, gets a building, hires a person, and plots a new school on the landscape. So that is something that cannot be called into being. That is to say, the consolidation of these schools, it happens. I've tried to broker it from time to time. I'm on two schools that seem to be so similar that it's senseless for one school of 80 and another school of 90 to exist within a few miles of one another. Rather, they might consider merger. But that happens only when the leadership of those schools feels so strapped that they feel the ship will sink unless they do something. So I want to share with you what is being done this moment to address some of these things. What do I see moving forward? And one comment which has not been made, which I do feel needs to be made, and I will make it even if somebody might consider it heretical. First off, BJE has done two things in the most recent decade.
Does this relate to the discussion?
Absolutely.
Okay.
One thing is that endowments did not exist in day schools in this community 10 years ago. BJE solicited and effectively secured a major endowment grant to work with schools in building endowment. From zero endowment a decade ago, there were $50 million in endowed resources in this community today associated with 20-day schools, you were girls among them, and $50 million spin off at 5%, $2.5 million in need-based aid. So $2.5 million in need-based aid was awarded this year and will be awarded next year and the year after because of efforts to initiate endowment.
Sorry, $2.5 million spread across all the day schools.
Spread across the 20 schools that have developed endowments. Correct. Now, number two, this, I would say this is necessary but insufficient. In other words, it's necessary to have more revenue to fund need-based aid. $50 million is a start. It's a small step forward. We need to make great strides forward, but of course that requires investment in people over the course of time. Preferably in their lifetime, but some people have made testamentary provisions too. The second thing is government resources. There are certain title programs for which money is available to promote student learning wherever the child may sit, in a public or private school. BJE has a consortium of 25 schools that secures roughly $2 million a year that benefits student learning in a variety of programs. Again, that's necessary, but it is not sufficient. And neither of those two things, neither further work in endowment development nor further work in securing government resources, is going to make a huge impact. I know the OU has this Teach New York program, and a guy came to Los Angeles to tout the wonders of this, and I said, tell me, with all of the money you've secured in the past few years, has tuition at Ramaz remained flat, gone down, or gone up? The answer is it's gone up. So,
And what's the heretical?
here is the heretical thing, my friend. Rabbi Tom spoke about the Mishkan and the luchot that were in the Mishkan. If you look in the text of the Chumash just before the luchot are presented, the people of Israel is told, "V'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh." You're to be a kingdom of priests. And Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, a colleague of Scott Goldbergs at Yeshiva University, Rabbi Sachs observed something quite remarkable. He said in ancient times, priests were the only literate people. What does it mean to be a kingdom of priests? Priests were literate. In fact, in English, you know, when we talk about clerical can be a secretary, but clerical garb is what the clergy wear. because the people who knew to read and write were the clergy, even in the Middle Ages. It's preserved in English. So when the people Israel is told, you will be a kingdom of priests, it means that every man, woman, and child is to have the opportunity to access Torah, to have literacy skills. I believe the Torah tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 6, V'shinantam levanecha, you shall teach your children. Nowhere in the Torah do I read the word day school. And though day school is a wonderful and important mechanism of Torah education, we cheat ourselves and we cheat generations of children if we take the approach that for the child who is not in a Jewish day school, Jewish learning, Jewish literacy, participation, and leadership in Jewish life is a non-possibility. I read this week, Rabbi Top, I know, is the vice president of the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America. His colleague, Rabbi Muskin, is the president.
Dr. Rabbi, I think we're going to go. Can we ask a few more questions on this? Or
You can ask as many questions as you like. I had a professor who said a good question is one for which
All right, let's go. So let me ask Dr. Goldberg. I'd love to hear more. So am I to understand that you don't think there is room for costs to go down?
I think the costs to go down, we've done it starting in 2007, 2008, the White School Partnership restructured about 100 budgets doing benchmarking. It was the first major benchmarking studies done in Jewish communities. It showed the 72 to 82% range of schools in terms of staffing costs and showed the percentage of tuition revenue yield versus what the range is in terms of percentages of kids on scholarships or not, ranging all the way from only 11% of kids on scholarship all the way up to about 72% of kids in some schools on scholarship in some ways. And there were all sorts of different studies done then. You can take a look back on the YU website, you can take a look back on the Prisma website, you can look on the on studies published by all sorts of YU Torah, all sorts of places where all that stuff is published. You can see all the data. You can also look at CASG, which is the Consortium for Applied Studies in Jewish Education, which has all sorts of empirical data online. You can look at that in the studies they published on things like this, but you can take a look at that. And what we've seen over and over again, is your sweeping statement that it's not on the cost side, it's on the cost side, not on the revenue side, is just wrong. The cost side actually should continue to increase because the cost of everything continues to increase, inflation continues to go up, and teachers are underpaid in many places. Maybe not in Los Angeles because of your hard work, Rabbi, but in other communities, they're underpaid. And in the last 3 days that I've been on the ground in Los Angeles, I've had dozens of conversations with lay leaders and professional leaders telling me it's actually challenging to recruit somebody here who is aligned with the hashkafa, with the religious philosophy of the institution to be a Judaic studies as a teacher, at the salaries that you're offering. So even if you're offering great salaries, even if you're struggling to be able to recruit people here in this community, maybe you're doing a better job recently, but it is a struggle. So 80% of that budget, it's just how you're going to do anything major to it. The OU has been putting millions of dollars into government funding, looking at government funding, and as you can see from Maureen Litwack leading that effort, the most it's going to yield is 3 to 5%.
I'm sure that's true. Let me ask though, let me say something more specifically. Two things. First of all, when I said there were no empirics or very few, I was specifically referring to education performance.
So I'll look at that. 2010, Goldberg, Weinberger, Ross. You can look at that in terms of outcomes of early literacy, given how important literacy is. You can look at 2012, Goldberg and Weinberger.
And it showed what?
And you can show that early investment, money, cost, looking at qualified Jewish educational teachers in the early literacy grades of kindergarten through third grade continue to show gains in literacy outcomes. When you don't have literacy outcomes, you can look at Goldberg 2004, you can see the extent to which those become social problems, behavior problems, and a host of other issues.
Nobody is against Jewish literacy.
No, I understand. But those
Nobody here is taking that position. I'm going to stop you real quick.
Well, what I would tell you when I would argue with you is you made a sweeping statement about what people are for or what people are against. What I would tell you is when you look at a values crisis, we're not only talking about a cup of coffee at Starbucks, but I paid a significant amount of money last summer because it was a value of mine to send my daughter to a camp over the summer, a program in Israel, for $9,000 for 5 weeks. Now, I chose to do that as a value of mine. How many people are arguing about the cost of the summer programs that are 4 to 8 weeks? How many people are arguing about the cost of of being able to belong to a shul? How many people are arguing about the cost of the restaurants in town? I would just say, I will tell you that those arguments need to be just as forefront as the Jewish educational arguments in terms of what the cost of education is, and the practical ramifications, the practical ways to be able to increase the revenue side, not only the endowments, and communities like Boston, not only Chicago, and Metro West New Jersey, and New York City, and others have built those endowments for middle-income families, and it's been successful. But you could do things like have your local rabbinic council make it so that there's a 3 to 5% tax on every restaurant and put it into an endowment. Make it so that every Pesach program has every kashrus organization putting a 3 to 5% tax on every one of those. The money is in the community on the revenue side. It is there. People don't have to have tuition as high. If you're, just as you heard in Toronto, you have the revenue side increased because of philanthropists and communal responsibility, reducing the revenue impact on the families that send their kids to school.
Right.
That's one of the ways in which you can improve the situation, but not on the backs of the teachers, not on the backs of the
Nobody's suggesting it come out of teacher salary.
That's exactly what you have to be
The only
suggesting.
suggestion was that the administrations seem to have grown a lot. And correct me if I'm wrong, but from I've done a lot of talking to a lot of different people at a lot of different schools over the last week, and they have noted to me off the record that the administrations have burgeoned a lot.
So I want to jump in on this.
Please do.
You mentioned auxiliary staff in your opening remarks.
I did.
And I want to ask the question, is a guidance counselor auxiliary staff? Would we ever send our daughters to schools without a guidance counselor today? Is a college counselor an auxiliary staff member? Is a special ed staff member or an auxiliary staff member? Is an athletic director an auxiliary cost? I take issue with the term auxiliary because I don't believe that any parent in this room would want to send their children to a school of just math and Chumash teachers. Schools are much more than just teaching content. They are much more than just teaching literacy. They are places where our children learn values and morals and socialization. They get the tools necessary to be successful in life as humans, not just as scholars. And so I'm concerned with the idea that we could reduce the costs significantly. And we're talking about significant cost reduction. Because I think if we came out of tonight saying that Eula Girls' cost would go down from $35,000 to $33,000 per student, I don't think anybody would be satisfied. I think what we're looking at is how do we reduce the cost from $35,000 to $25,000 or to $20,000. And that's not going to be on the backs of the 1 or 2 additional administrators that some people think schools have extra, or on the auxiliary staff that I don't believe anybody would want to send their children to schools without.
Okay, that's a wonderful point. Let me ask you then, what is Eula Girls School doing to control costs?
We examine every line item that we spend. We second guess every cost that we have in the school, from the plates that we buy, from the napkins that we buy, from the pens that we have. If you removed all of the technology in the school, you referenced earlier the technology costs and how they're sorting in smart notes. The technology cost at Eula Girls roughly amounts to about $150,000 in our operating budget. We have an $8 million budget. Take out that $150,000, how much have you reduced tuition for 173 girls? I don't know the math on that, someone does. It's inconsequential. I sit with lay leaders and with board members, and we have talks about efficiencies. Can we maximize the number of classes teachers teach? At what cost? How many periods could a teacher teach per day? That's a great question, and one that we continue to look at. Can we maximize the number of periods a teacher teaches? We need specialists. We want kids to have AP classes. An AP physics teacher doesn't come at $60,000. But you wouldn't send your kids to a school without an AP chemistry teacher or an AP physics teacher. You want your kids to have a music program. You want your kids to have a drama program. You want your kids, and you deserve, as do I, our kids to have the best. The best is expensive. I agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Goldberg. We do not have an expense issue. We have a revenue issue. And I want to elaborate on that if I could for a moment. We have actually been undercharging for years tuition to many parents that can afford the full cost. We are subsidizing the cost of education because we are worried about the full payers, and we don't want to continue burdening the full payers with the actual cost of education. If we would actually charge the actual cost per child for each child, and those full payers who could afford 35, could afford 38, or could afford 39, we would then be able to potentially not have to continuously run after donors and investors to invest 100,000 here, 200,000 here, come to the trustees dinner, come to the comedy night, come to this event. But instead, we could channel those resources and talk to those donors about long-term investments, about endowments, about $1 million gifts, $2 million gifts, not 100,000 here to stop the gap in our budget to help us pay the electricity bill next week. Because if we charge the actual cost of tuition, we wouldn't have to worry about the small incremental cost. We'd be able to go to donors to invest long-term in the school, not short-term.
I would love at this time to take questions from any members of the audience.
Yeah, please go ahead. I just wanted to add a few points to piggyback on Rabbi, what he was saying about there are some ways to reduce costs directly to parents by, for example, early registration, to waive the registration fee for them. Sometimes it's up to $500 in some schools. So that could be significant to some families. Also doing, not a 2-for-1 exactly, but almost like a 2-for-1, to have a discount for additional children for more than one child, and cap it, no matter how many kids you have in the school, to cap that amount. So it's not, you're not charging for each individual child a full tuition. There's, you can pare it down a little bit with no frills, although that's a double-edged sword because the athletics and the drama is what draws kids to, have a big school experience. Also, there are some very successful tax programs, and Nevada has the best one, I think. Louisiana, Iowa, New York, where you get a tax credit on your income tax if you donate the money to a tuition organization. And they're nonprofit organizations that collect all that money. They're only allowed to use 10% of what they collect, and the rest of it is divided amongst schools. In Nevada, they have a Jewish tuition organization, and they have a lot of money from the taxes there in that, and it helps all the Jewish schools to defray the cost of tuition for the parents to make it affordable. There was a bill in California to do the same thing, and it got squashed in 2006. So if anybody knows how to get a bill going again, I think that could be revived, and I think that would be very helpful.
Does anyone want to have any questions?
Can I just add one more comment before we take questions? I moved here from South Florida a year and a half ago. South Palm Beach County in South Florida, about 6 years ago, released a study of where the percentage of philanthropy within the Jewish community and where philanthropists within the South Palm Beach community were giving their money. Right? And they ranked it. Number 1, Israel. Number 2, anyone want to guess? Zoos. Number 3, hospitals. Number 4, museums. Day school education was ranked number 9. I humbly submit again that we have a values crisis. If our philanthropists in the Jewish community are not convinced that Jewish day schools are more important than zoos and museums, and I dare say even supporting Israel, I think we have a values question.
Any questions?
Yeah, a question for Rabbi Goldberg.
Yes.
Yes, Rabbi Goldberg. You referenced earlier the idea of putting on a tax or a fee at restaurants for the Jewish consumer. That seems like a marvelous idea. Has that been done before, or do we have to worry about being challenged constitutionally?
I don't think you have to worry about it constitutionally. I think you have to worry about it with your kashrus organizations. Each of the kashrus organizations and rabbis that I've spoken to about it behind the scenes have said that the challenge is the competition in the kashrus organizations. Therefore, what happens is if the local VOD says we're not going to allow a restaurant to have an external VOD, let's say the local VOD here would say we're not going to allow the OK or the KLUFK or a national organization to come in, or even a statewide organization, we're going to allow the local VOD to do the kashrus, and you have control over it to a certain extent. But what winds up happening in other communities is that the other kashrus organizations, the restaurants just go to other kashrus organizations that's outside the control of the local rabbis. So I think that this, again, it's a communal question. It's not a question of tuition crisis in terms of the schools. It's not an issue of cost on the schools. It's a communal issue that I hope that the rabbis take leadership of in partnership with the leadership of the schools, in partnership with the leadership of the BJE, in order to be able to solve it, because I think that you can generate a significant amount of revenue that way.
Quick comment and a question.
Who's the question for?
Well, it's based on what Dr. Park said, but it's for anyone else who wants to answer. Some things changed. Teacher costs have always been high, but I compared tuition to 11 years ago when I graduated high school to now, and it's over to almost 3 times more. Other things haven't gone up that much for most things, at least things that haven't improved in quality. So something has changed in the last 10, 15 years. So if Dr. Park's school is so much less, obviously it's sort of an extreme example, but has any other school tried to integrate to some degree?
Emmett in the Valley is significantly less than our day schools.
And they integrate online education?
No, they don't. They actually have done it through cost cutting.
Okay. But has any school tried online education to some degree, make it an option for 10 to 20% of classes if teacher costs are 80% of where the tuition is going?
So again, go back to 2008 to 10, and the numbers really, if you look at the California numbers, you look at the national numbers from the business leaders of independent schools, the numbers have largely stayed the same. We did a study looking at 2 different schools down the street from each other, looking at cost difference, just to mention why it is that the AMIC piece or other schools might be less. Again, it goes to the following. One school was an $11,000 cost per child. One was a $32,000 cost per child. That was a differential between 2 schools down the street from each other. When you look under the hood, you notice that the $11,000 per child cost was a cost because ultimately most of the highest paid faculty member was a faculty member paid $32,000 annually, and the lowest faculty member was paid $11,000 annually. The school that was charged the cost per child was $32,000 was the highest paid faculty member was $100,000, and the lowest paid faculty member starting salary was at $32,000. The difference ultimately is where you recruit your faculty from, the level of salary that is a livable wage for that family based on the values that they have. Many of our schools, if you rewind back as far as you were rewinding even further, relied on families that were not the modern Orthodox families to have their kids go into Jewish education, to be the role models that we have in the ULA and other institutions. They were those who were coming from families to the right, who were willing to accept the combined salary of a 19-year-old girl out of seminary to be able to teach at $11,000 salary before she would be married and then move on to whatever else she moved on to if best. Over and over again, community. This is not a Los Angeles issue. This is a national issue. And the numbers, they pretty much bear out. If you want to invest in quality of education that has the faculty members who can be amazing superstars, paid that amount of money, but it's a rare piece in terms of their alignment of the values of the community that is represented by Beth Jacob and the modern Orthodox, Central Orthodox community of Beverly Hills, you will have the tuition be significantly less because the cost of child student will be significantly less. And if you want to invest in faculty that align, because we expect that our children graduating will become can become doctors, lawyers, businessmen, and educators, we want them to have a livable wage, and that livable wage is just not $11,000 a year. And we expect much more, and then the salaries are going to, and the cost per child is going to be higher.
Anybody else have a question? Got 2 over here.
First, thank you guys for coming out. This is probably a difficult audience and a difficult topic for many of us. Endowments aside, because what's going to happen with endowments is the end payers of this aren't taking the full cost, they'll never drive cost savings. And so speaking of cost savings, what can you guys commit to tonight about merging and reducing costs? What are the ideas that if you had to be creative, what's in your control right now to reduce costs across the board for education?
Well, let me give you the following observation. There are schools. Are you looking at elementary schools? Is your focus? Okay. Elementary school, there is one in the valley. It's called Or HaChagim. It's not online instruction, it's live classroom instruction. The tuition is $6,500. It is a 35-minute drive in the morning to take your kid. If anyone would like elementary school education at $6,500, you can buy it. There is a blessing of 38-day schools in this city, which means there is choice. It's not the case in every community.
But let them answer his question.
Well, what he's asking is, schools are governed by school boards. None of us here can direct Maimonides or Yavne or Hillel to change its tuition. They are corporations governed by a board of directors. It's their fiduciary responsibility to govern the school with a vision of what they want to accomplish in partnership with their professional leadership and to charge tuition accordingly. So you, as a consumer, can visit the school, see what judgments they've made, petition the board to consider other things, but nobody, by collective action here, can determine what course any school in our constellation will take. There are facts on the ground, there are choices of no-frills opportunity.
But let's
So
try.
what can you guys do?
Here. Our school has been in conversation with another Jewish high school in town we're talking about ways that we can work together. So it would probably benefit us. Well, it would benefit them too, but I don't think their tuition would necessarily lower, but it would create revenue for us. So on that level, it would be more beneficial to us. It would help the school, that school, and it would help our school too.
And I don't have a school myself, but schools like Beulah and other schools I work with on a daily basis, consulting with the boards and the schools to look do those line item pieces. Every school is looking under every single rock to see where their savings can be. At the same time, there are big ideas in communities where you're forced to do something. Yeah, how many shul infrastructures do you have? There have been times even recently where shuls have been built here. Well, they had to be housed in schools. There are communities where every shul is housed in a school. Reduces the infrastructure costs for the community. I am not telling you, I'm about to get on a plane so it doesn't matter if I am telling you, but let's say I'm not telling you, sell Beth Jacob, and sell Yik, and sell every other shul that's in town, and just make it so that you have everybody daven in a school. First of all, I think that there's value to shuls and the separation of shuls and schools. However, you as a community get to choose your values and what you value your investments in.
Okay, but we have a question.
I prefer that to talk about the schools though, instead of going to like synagogues or
Let's stay on
restaurants.
Rabbi Slovak.
It's not exactly like that, because all you guys are very influential. And what Nathan is talking when he's saying what you can do and guarantee, I'm sure he's not talking about something specifically that you can lay out and plan, but you could influence. And when you have the appeals for a new synagogue or a new community building, you could use your influence and tell those great rabbis and say, hey guys, there are people who are struggling in your community with Jewish daycare. So what do you care about more? Having a very nice Beit Midrash with very expensive books, or put some books online, put iPads, and direct some of those donations to Jewish day schools. So we're just...
Yes, that's what you meant? No. I thought we have, like, you guys are very experienced professionals in our day school programs. I feel that there's a lack of ways you can come up with where you can share and do cost savings across the board. It's not a priority. So it's a priority. What can you guys do right now to share costs and reduce costs?
So I'll reiterate what I mentioned at the outset, a few ideas that I think could happen, without a lot of pushback. I think the idea of looking at finding a way for all of the schools to work together on benefits packages for faculty. Our average expense on benefits, on an $8 million budget, we're spending close to $1 million on benefits. Could we reduce medical costs if we had a larger pool of faculty? The assumption is yes. I don't know if that's the case. I'm not an expert in medical insurance, but I would imagine that if we were able to partner together with some of the feeder schools in our area and other high schools, that with a larger pool of employees, we would be able to reduce some of those costs immediately. Again, I think, and it's not a popular suggestion, but I think we need to tighten our financial aid process. I think we have to look at how we are distributing financial aid, what are the mechanisms that we're using, what criteria we're using to evaluate, and if we would substantially reduce the financial aid to families that don't necessarily qualify but are getting it because for whatever reason they think they need a discount, I think we would have substantial savings in that area. And again, I really think that schools would benefit from having a CFO or an accountant who could take a hard look at our numbers and do the kind of business accounting that educational experts don't necessarily have.
That's an excellent idea.
I
saw that lady.
I didn't ask.
Oh, all right.
I would ask
We're
this.
translating.
So, we're all talking about what I prefer to call the hard tuition, and there's also the soft tuition.
Wait, do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's something that I want to ask you about. I don't know if there's something that we can do about it or something we can talk to people about it. And when we pay soft tuition, the hard tuition comes out as a bill that you come and you pay. But then there's a soft tuition for parents who work full time. And then there's a half Friday here, a half day here, the day off there, and the event that comes in between 11 and 12, which practically kills a work day. And all these things add up to your personal time off, which is money.
Right, so where's the question?
So the question is, what can, basically the same thing that Nate now, what can you do about it? What can the schools do about it? How can they be more considerate to parents who really need to work to pay that tuition?
Our school, personally, we can't, there's a lot of things we can't change about our dates that we're there because we rent the third floor of the JCC. So we don't own a big building, we don't have that big school experience, but it's a big cost saver for us. But we have to abide by their J camp when they come and when they go. So we have to evacuate our third floor, so we can't do that. I wanted to tell you about another cost saving that some of the schools could do. A lot of kids are leaving the schools after 12th grade. They're taking the Chesapeake and going on to Santa Monica College or another community college, which is saving the parents that tuition. But you know, it's not for everybody, but a lot of kids do that. A lot of seniors don't go to school full-time, not even half-time. But at our school, we allow the kids to graduate after 11th grade if they're able to. They can take classes. As they finish, they can add another one on. So it's a huge savings for parents because they don't have to come for 12th grade. It's 3 years of high school, not 4. And they also are taking college credits along the way. So that's also a big savings for parents. I think we're really kind of going above and beyond to provide that large savings for parents that I think other schools could do as well.
Thank you. I think there was a lady right there we didn't get to.
Rabbi Spodek, you've mentioned a couple of times that you think there are a lot of people receiving financial aid who don't necessarily need it. I wonder how many times you've filled out those financial aid forms, because I have spent many, many hours over the last 15 years of my life filling out those forms. And I have to tell you that every year, over and over again, I have to justify why I can't pay a tuition that's more than 50% of my pre-tax salary. I'm sure you're right, there's some fraud, but there must be another way to differentiate between those who value their Lexus more than their kids' tuition and people like me who are struggling to earn a living in the city and struggling to pay for a cheap apartment in this neighborhood and put my kids to education first. There has to be some way besides hours and hours and 12 months worth of every single account statement of every account that I have. There's something unnecessarily humiliating about our financial aid system.
That's exactly.
I agree. I do agree. I have filled out those same financial aid applications my entire adult life since my oldest started school at 5 years of age. I'm an educator. My wife's in education. We've been filling out those same financial aid applications, not just for schools, but for camps. We don't have the luxury of sending our kids to Model UN or to APAC or on basketball tournaments. So I share your pain in the process. I believe that many schools, ourselves, you girls included, work really hard on ensuring that the financial aid process is honorable, is as easy as possible, and as painless as possible. And at the same time, we are, most of us, suffering from the, I don't want to put a percentage on how many abuse the system, but we are suffering by those that are abusing the system. Because it is not rare where we find families are hiding money, families have real estate that they're not declaring, W-2s don't match up to their stated income. We have an external accountant looking at all of these numbers, and the numbers don't match up. And it's not 3 or 4 families out of the 100 families in our school that are on financial aid. It's a significant number, and so I agree with you. If there was a better way to do this process, we would love to find one, and I'm open to any and all suggestions. But we are struggling with the fact that too many families are simply looking for discounts and looking for reduction in cost so that they can afford the Tesla or the family vacation to Mammoth or to Hawaii or on a pay-stub program.
Right. I understand that those families are out there. I suggest that the community, maybe through BJE, share a blacklist. Because honestly, I've spent 15 years proving over and over again how low my income is. I have a master's degree. I have a 25-year career in a specialized field. It's a non-profit field. That hasn't changed in 25, that hasn't changed in all my 15 years of being a parent. Why isn't there some way of saying, hey, this woman has earned, has proven herself, and this person is hopping around. They cheated the elementary school, and now they're cheating high school. These people are known members of the community. There should be some centralized way to look at this information.
So I think that the system is broken, as you say, and it's broken on 2 fronts. One is the issue of the hopping and the issue of the institutional history, the communal history, and 2 is the experience that people have. On the first part, there are a number of communities that have centralized systems. Bergen County, New Jersey is one of them. You can look there, you have a centralized system. They gather the data, they keep the data from year to year. There are ways to be able to streamline the process and make it so that it's outside the hands of the school in some ways, which also creates a sense of comfort for those in some ways. Again, I think everybody has an individualized experience that they can speak to, but I think that there are some ways to mitigate the challenge and the pain. And Bergen County is working on that, and I would look at them as a model. Number 2, I think that, just want to note, because I don't think any of the here will note this, I started my career in the classroom. I was an administrator, and I'm now at the university level, but I will tell you, I find it challenging to hear that an educator who has made a choice to put his family into the communal sphere and choose to go into education as a career has to fill out a financial aid form. It is absurd. Communities need to honor their educators. They need to put them up with the rabbis and say, administrators are earning a certain salary, certainly you're expect to build it into your package, what it's going to look like given tuition. But teachers oftentimes have to fill these out. We know the salaries of teachers. We talked about it a lot tonight. We have to make it a process where we invite people and encourage people and inspire people to go into Jewish education. It's not going to be if they have to also, in addition to giving their lives to the school, have to also fill out a financial aid form when you already know what they earn.
Okay, any more questions? This gentleman right here.
Is there any data on how much transparency there is on the school side? I know on Facebook there's a spreadsheet going around with the cost of tuition at all the Jewish day schools, if anyone wants to find it, and it shows each school, high school and elementary school, what people are paying, and what on the other side is how open the schools are to exposing their budgets and how much money goes to big categories, obviously not individual salaries.
Is that a question?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry.
There are communities where in schools where they publish annual reports with those categories.
I think it was pretty transparent in LA. Everybody kind of knows what the tuition is at all the schools.
Not the tuition, the cost of the
hidden cost, so.
But the cost.
Right. Oh,
the other way around, not the
Right, right.
No, I don't think that's out anywhere.
And they're asking people to, expose their own financial thing. They should be reciprocal, at least to some extent.
Very good point.
I appreciate all the panelists coming out tonight. As a father of 2 girls, I was voting my questions directed toward yourself. I was a little bit surprised that you said that the tuition right now is theoretically subsidized, and that, when I graduated 13 years ago, $16,000. And checking the website now, it's around $38,000 with fees and everything like that. So the question is tuition plus fees. So the question is, what do you think the true cost would be if it wouldn't be subsidized, number one? And then secondly, what specifically is ULA doing? Let's say you mentioned a CFO or finding someone from a business perspective to help out. What exactly are the steps that ULA girls are taking in order to make the school more efficient overall?
Excellent questions. I look forward for your girls to join you with girls in the next few years. The actual cost of education, the first question you have to ask is, are you including the financial aid number in your actual cost of education or not? Best practice would tell you that you don't factor in the financial aid number into your actual cost per student. And that schools, I only know of one school in South Florida that has that practice, where the cost of education is not included, the cost of financial aid is not included in the cost of education, and the school has to go out and raise whatever their financial aid number is per year, 1.2 million, 1.7 million, whatever they raise, and whatever they don't, and they turn kids away once they reach that threshold. Most yeshiva high schools that I know of, including ULA, factor that cost into their cost of education. So on our budget, our cost of education would actually be more like $42,000 per student when you factor in the $1.72 million that we gave out this past year in financial aid. And we're charging $35,900 in tuition with a few $1,000s in fees, which is standard across the city. I want to address both questions in terms of transparency. Our board has been very open about being transparent with our numbers. We've shared in the last number of years real data and real numbers to our community in explaining the rise in costs in our tuition, the amount of money that we're giving out in financial aid, and we've been open to welcoming outside professionals to come in and review our budgets. If there is anybody that can find savings within our budget that would allow us to reduce the cost of education, there would be no pushback from anybody on our board, and myself included, in that sense. And so we're transparent and we welcome it. What steps are we actively taking? We are actively seeking and looking to find those professionals that can come in and do an accurate assessment of our operating expenses to determine if there are cost savings that are available. My hunch is that we will find, if any, minimal savings that will not reduce the cost of tuition that we're looking for. Again, if you take away technology, it's $150,000 in an $8 million budget. And I can go through each line item and ask, and then it's a question, and then it comes down to that question of, well, do we want a school without a STEAM lab? Do we want a school, right? And then you have to go through that values exercise of what do we believe. And when you line up 5 parents and you ask them that question, each parent will have a different answer as to what is important to them and why they chose your school. So how do you make that decision in terms of what line item you pull away from the budget at what cost to students?
Thank you.
So this lady.
So the conversation that we're having tonight is not only relevant to Jewish parents. This is a conversation for any parent in Los Angeles that wants to send their child to a private school. So you can universalize this to any of the day schools or high schools. The exception, it seems to me, Catholic schools. Are any of you familiar with the Catholic school model? Because it seems like their tuitions are significantly lower than tuitions we're talking about today.
Well, I would say there are 3 factors that are a little different in Catholic schools. One is, by and large, Catholic schools are no frills. They do not have fencing teams. They do not have 12 AP courses. Fencing, by the way, and water polo are in several of our Jewish high schools. And the schools take the greatest pride in the wide array of extracurriculars, many of which call upon students to be traveling, talk about costs that are beyond the tuition, traveling to this place, that place, the next place, around the continent to participate in inter-squad activities in those things. So number 1, they tend to be no frills. Number 2, class size in many Catholic schools can be 30 and 35 and as many as 40 children. In Jewish day schools, you more commonly find 15, 18, 20, 22 students. Number 3, you have have some number. It's not as robust as it used to be, but there were nuns and priests who commit their lives to the service of the church. They do not have families. They are not sending their children to day schools. They sometimes have parish provided housing and modest, very modest salaries. And there are some parishes which do support, they collect from the faithful in their area to the support of the school in ways of the sort that Rabbi Dr. Goldberg was suggesting earlier. So they enjoy a broad base of communal support. All of those factors are in place. Again, we have in our community, in the valley, you can go to Orach Chaim, there are 200 children there. Rabbi Gabai, not unlike Rabbi Menachem Gottesman decades ago, takes the attitude that every Jewish child should have the opportunity of being seated in a day school, no frills education, and teachers are paid without benefits that run to 12% of the budget, and money is raised from others. Very few of the families pay the full tuition of $6,500 in that particular school. So that is more consistent with the Catholic school model.
Also, the diocese in most of the areas they support the schools. But Los Angeles has the highest tuition of anywhere in the world. And the average, according to Bloomberg, it's a new poll or study that came out, it's $60,000 is the average private school tuition in Los Angeles right now. And you can see why places like outside of Dallas and Cleveland and other smaller cities, they're really growing, and the day schools are growing in those other cities because the housing is affordable. And not that, I don't think the schools are getting smaller here. They seem to be growing, just with the cost of living. Everything else is going up with the tuition as well, and the teacher salaries. I was wondering too, maybe, for example, Shalahabad has that whole apartment building right beside it or connected. I don't know what kind of, if it's just regular apartments or not, but maybe there's a way to sponsor teachers or to have teacher housing and at a really affordable price that the school could help pay, or the federation, I don't know, somebody, and maybe that would help to lower the cost of tuition that could be passed down to the parents.
That's a good point.
I think that Rabbi Spodek, the point that you made about the order of philanthropy in that study was very meaningful, and I was wondering if anybody has any ideas of how to change the approach from philanthropists to get them to give more money towards Jewish education. I think it's we live in a time of unprecedented wealth in America, and I think if we could come up with some way to maybe tap into some of the Hollywood money and put it into endowments, that certainly make a big difference. And then I just wanted to ask one other question. I'm very involved in Du Bois, and I'm very familiar with the budget, and a big part of the budget is the security. And is there any money available from the Homeland Security to help defray some of the costs of security, to have armed guards at the school? Because we live in this time where you have to worry about things like that, unfortunately, and maybe that could make a difference to sort of try and reduce some costs if we could get some help in that area.
So the OU and the Agudas Israel are doing great work in terms of lobbying for the security and other costs. And again, you're talking incremental changes, not huge super changes. In terms of the question about philanthropy, Rav Shefter YU says 80% local, 50% of it should go to Taylor. I will tell you that I've been in this community many times for Shabbat and for holidays. I marvel at the amount of people who are collecting money here for causes that are not local and are not Taylor. And again, it's a values judgment. It's not for me to come in and tell you you shouldn't do that. I just tell you it's not the same in other communities. And it's not the same that every shul president and rabbi have people coming in to collect money in those shuls. And yes, people can come in and freely come and give to wherever they like to give. But from a values perspective in terms of making it so that Jewish education, whether it's a Talmud Torah or it's a day school, and I would vote for day schools given the research on what the outcomes are. Again, we can look at all those websites I suggested earlier for the details. The reality is that a lot of the money is local. There is a lot of money here locally and in other communities. And it's not a matter of taking it out of their Starbucks coffee, or as I was saying earlier, there are certainly people who can make a difference and have made a difference and can continue to make a difference.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a communal question, Brian. I think it's a question of the leadership of the community has to stand up and once for all say, as Yeshua ben Gamla said 2,000 years ago, it is a priority that every single child get a Jewish education, and that's a non-negotiable.
I will say that Yeshua ben Gamla related to 50% of the Jewish population. Male children were invited to attend those schools. As to those 50%, Yeshua ben Gamla began with the proposition that they should come at a certain age, perhaps in their teen years. He discovered that when the children were beaten, they didn't respond well, whereas the 5 or 6-year-olds could be whipped.
Do you disagree that it's a communal responsibility? I'm just asking. We can talk about the details of it. Do you disagree that it's a communal responsibility, Bill?
I actually think that the word communal responsibility sometimes diverse. It's, who is the community? The community is nothing more than a coalition of the willing. There is no organized Jewish community. I don't know of an organized Jewish community. America is a place of autonomy. You write for the Federalists. You know about that. And it is a nation that prides itself on autonomy. There is no communal discipline. There is no communal coercion. And willing people who coalesce together for a certain cause can make dreams come true. But who will you gather? You think if Rabbi Top and Rabbi Muskin decree X, the Jews of this area are going to fall in line?
I don't think there's hope, but I do think that each of them and every other rabbi in this community can say no to more people collecting within this community.
I also want to, if I may, just complete a thought.
I totally agree with that, by the way.
When I referenced earlier Rabbi Top's position of distinction on the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, it's the group of Orthodox rabbis in America. And that group, since 1958, at the time under the leadership of Norman Lamb, has published a journal called Tutition of modern Orthodox Jewish thought. The journal Tutition just named its new editor. His name is Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs. Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs went to public elementary school.
I think I have to stop you. Where are we going?
Where we're going with this is that I do believe that there is a responsibility of the willing to see to it that children who do not go to Jewish day schools have Jewish learning opportunities that are affordable, accessible, and excellent.
I just wanted to answer, I think, Brian's question about how we can access the philanthropists within our community. I would humbly suggest that instead of bringing together the greatest minds within the world of Jewish education to focus on how we reduce the cost of tuition, we bring those great minds together to figure out how we build decks and marketing campaigns and strategies to sell Jewish community, Jewish education to the philanthropists in our community. We don't have in schools the resources to build marketing campaigns that will appeal to the Spielbergs and the other wealthy people in this community that could afford the kind of endowments that we're looking for. But if we would invest our time in building platforms and marketing campaigns that will entice the philanthropists to recognize the value of Jewish education to Jewish community and Jewish continuity, I believe we have an opportunity to.
Wait, one last question.
I love what you said, so why don't we get the Bureau of Jewish Education to do that? They're our head.
Yes.
I
do believe that there was. I do believe, Dr. Graff, humbly, that it is. I do believe that the community that we will all look to is the Federation and is the Board of Jewish Education.
And the Federation is very little.
The yes.
Very.
And I think that they are meant to be the umbrella for all of Judaism within the Los Angeles community. And if we could channel our resources through that entity, I think we would have great success.
That's a great point. Thank you all for coming.